Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle King. I'm the Managing Director of Capacity Building International, and welcome to the webinar. It's our kickoff session for our 2021 webinar series, and we're going to be focusing on international models in crisis management. Now, I'm joined here today by Harold Drager from the International Emergency Management Society. He's going to be joining us and presenting us some additional information. There he is. Now we've got him on camera. And also with Victoria. So Victoria is from CBI, and she's going to be collecting the questions as we go through the presentations and collecting your ideas and thoughts and contributions as we move forward through our webinar series today. So what I'm going to do and how we're going to do it this morning is, or this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are, is I'm just going to go through some administrative issues and kind of explain the process in our webinar series as we do this kickoff, and then I'll hand it over to Harold, and he's going to go into a little bit more details into kind of the theories and the rationale about why we're looking at this from a global perspective, and which we've got a lot of good information there inside of that, just to give you a brief overview. The webinar overall is going to be fairly short today, comparatively speaking to other webinars, because we just wanted to do a quick introduction. And so with that, we'll just get started on some administrative issues and do some introductions. So starting with me, this is basically the same thing you saw on the Zoom registration page, so I won't read it to you, but basically my name is Kyle King. I'm the Managing Director of Capacity Building International, and we focus on building more resilient societies internationally. And my background itself is coming out of the emergency services with the U.S. Department of Defense, and then I started working for NATO as a civilian advisor in civil emergency planning, and then transitioned over to support different international organizations and also founded Capacity Building International. I came out of the DoD Emergency Services as a Chief Fire Officer, Instructor, and Inspector, and then worked in security sector reform and security assistance with a focus on rebuilding emergency services post-conflict. And then also we've got Harold, and he can introduce himself as well. Harold, do you want to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, I can do that. My background is engineering, both from Norwegian Technical University and from Purdue University in US. And I have been working as a Tiems president, Tiems, the International Emergency Management Society, since its inauguration in 1993. And I've been president since 2002. And well, work very much internationally. I think that should be it.
All right, so a few points just for today, or just for this webinar. So what I'd really like to know, since we had an overwhelming response to this webinar, we had well over 100 people register for this event today, is where are you from? And just let us know, drop it really quickly in the chat and let us know where you're coming from so that we can kind of get an understanding of the different time zones that we're operating in. Because as you know, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, time zones are an issue for an international audience. And then also, if you do have any questions when they come up, use the Q&A feature, because we do have Victoria here with us today, and she's going to be monitoring the Q&A in case you have any questions for Harold or myself, or any contributions to our future webinars. Make sure you use that Q&A session or Q&A section as we move forward. All right, so the 2021 program, why we're actually here. And so the reason why we're here is, and why we wanted to do a kickoff, is because of the fact that we wanted to be able to explain what we wanted to achieve, and then to be able to talk to you about this before we actually start diving into these webinars and start presenting you with information, because we want to make sure that you're going to be getting a lot of value from what we're presenting throughout the rest of 2021. This is not intended to be just a one-way discussion and just, beat you up with slides and be able to feed you information. This is intended to be a conversation with you for those that are in this community, of those that are interested professionally, either if you're a student or if you're working in emergency management and you want to learn more about the models used in other nations. And this is meant to be that type of conversation. And so in order to do that, in order for us to achieve that, we had to first do a kickoff session so that we could establish these kind of baselines and understanding before we move forward, because we do want to be able to get your questions and ask them to the presenters as we move throughout the year. And so this is designed to be interactive. We want you to be interactive with us. We want you to ask the questions that you find most appealing and the questions that you have we want to be giving to the speakers before they can actually present their different models. And so that's why we wanted to have a kickoff session. And it's really about having a conversation and not just a presentation. And so I can actually see, if I'm looking at the chat now, this is just amazing. We've got so many different countries here, from Canada, from the United States, from Zagreb, been to Zagreb many times, Toronto, just France, Greece, Pakistan, Finland, Germany. Wow, fantastic. Just many different countries, and it's just, we've got a broad audience. China, Switzerland, Oregon, Germany. That's perfect. So we are going to have issues with time zones, of course, but we'll get to that in just a couple of slides. Perfect. Slovakia, Portugal. That's wonderful. Okay, great. So this is meant to be a conversation and not just a presentation. And what we do want to know is, what do you want to know? And so do you have a specific focus or a specialty that you are working in? So I've already had some requests to find out more about what other nations do as far as mitigation, or even in just an interesting conversation with Larry, who is here, I think today. We were talking about just understanding the mechanisms of response. Do we all fundamentally understand the terminology used in emergency management? Sometimes we take that for granted and we think that response means one thing and it may mean something else to others. And so understanding terminology, but even if you have a focus area such as mitigation, or if you work in floodplain management and you are working in that functional area or specialty of floods, should we be talking to the Dutch authorities, for example, or should we be talking to other nations? So what is your functional area? What is your specialty? What is your focus? And what would you like to learn about? And also, we have to consider structures. When we, for example, are in the United States and we have a specific idea about how, we have FEMA and we have state level, and then we have, municipal level and cities and structures. That's our one idea of how emergency management functions. But what do other nations do? What are their structures like? Do they have a national disaster management authority or not? Or what do they call it? What are the names that they use, and what are the legal mechanisms that they use? So there's structural questions that we can ask as well. So all of these are leading into a very good discussion that we want to have in the future. And you don't have to ask the questions now, but what you can do, if you do have some questions that you would want to get on record now, you can use the Q&A feature. You can drop those questions in as we go through the presentation, and then we'll start recording those for future presentations as well. So what should we actually expect when we're going through this webinar series this year? Well, it's going to be a monthly webinar series, and we're really looking at towards the end of the month when these will be sent out. Now, of course, you're going to get an invitation that'll be sent in advance, and that'll be going out about mid-month. And the presentations will be essentially during the webinar itself. We'll have about a half an hour to maybe about 40 minutes of a presentation. And then we're going to turn over to some panelists, and the panelists will rotate, and it'll be generally me and Harold that'll be on the panel, and followed probably with somebody else that'll join us. And then we're going to have panelists who will ask kind of the same questions that go throughout the 2021 series, because we want to provide some consistency across all the questions that we're asking. And so we'll have a set of questions that we'll be using, maybe 2-3 questions that we'll be asking. And then we're going to move to a Q&A session, and with those that are attending the actual event itself. And then we'll open it up to your questions, and then we'll try and answer those as best we can. If there is an interest in doing something like a deep dive, if you do actually have an interest in, and we say we do one presentation with a national model and people are extremely interested in that, we will schedule a follow-up session, and we will do a deep dive series on that model to find out more about the mechanics and how it works and how it functions, if there's enough interest to do so. So what we're really looking at for 2021 is kind of going into a broad look across the spectrum of different international models. Now, where are we actually going to be starting? What models are we going to be looking at? So we're going to be starting in Europe as we move through this process, and that's just simply for ease of use and easiest reference, but that can expand. We can start just looking across the board globally, in places like Australia, Japan, South Korea, and others. And it's really just about, right now for us, it's just about bandwidth and timing and getting people to come on board and present their national models. We'll be starting with Europe and then moving out from there. And so that's something that we're going to be progressively moving through at that point. Now, as I mentioned, time zones. Time zones are going to be an issue for us because we do have such a global audience. We will have a centralized time being maybe kind of Central Europe or something like that, but we will try and find a time that will be applicable to everybody across the spectrum. Unfortunately, we can't fit in everybody. So we will be having recordings of each of these sessions, and they will be distributed to everybody that's registered. So for whatever reason, if you can't make it, you can still register, and we will send out a recording to everybody that's registered for the events. Now, if you do want to get the notifications, then just make sure you're either on the Teams website or the Teams email distribution list, or you're with us on CBI and our distribution list, and we'll be sending out these event reminders about mid-month, and then you can register for there, or you can even follow us on social media as we post it on there as well. Let's see, there's one question already. Yeah, so community preparedness, building cultures of preparedness, and so yeah, training and merge. Yeah, lots of topics there that we can talk about. We'd love to get into all these different type of aspects as we move through this this program. So we will distribute the recordings. They will come out 24 hours afterwards. So this recording now will be going out 24 hours. It'll be coming out tomorrow, and you'll have the opportunity to look at that as well. If you are in fact interested, if you are actually working in your national authority and you are interested in supporting the series, there's a number of ways that you can do that. So you can help us build this community. You can help us communicate this out and broaden the audience. You can share the information, and you can help engage with your questions and your inputs as far as what you would like to see and shape future presentations. This is going to be a growing and a learning experience. This is one of the first times that I've actually seen, I could be wrong, but one of the first times I've seen we've taken such a global look at the way that we do things in the emergency management sphere. And so this is something that is will evolve and will mature as we move across all these different presentations. And certainly, of course, ask questions. And what can we answer or ask for you and answer questions for you as we move through these different presentations. If you are coming from that type of disaster management authority and you do want to present your model, obviously you're more than welcome to. Just send us an email or contact us. We'll have our emails listed at the end of this presentation, and you can contact us and let us know if you'd be willing to do so. So that's a short overview, and what we'll do right now, let me just take a really quick look at the questions. Okay, so integration of emergency management phases in other nations. So we don't see much integration in the US. Okay, so a question about the phases of emergency management and how they're used in other nations. That's a great subject to be talked about previously as well. It was mentioned about mitigation was brought up as an issue that somebody wanted to look at as well. Terminology was one, and then of course, that was already put into the chat. We could see community preparedness, building cultures of preparedness in society, training, and emergency management exercises. That's actually a really good one. And that would be a great topic to look at as well. Disaster logistics management would be also interesting. And one of the things, I know we have a lot of kind of deep expertise here, the people that are attending this webinar right now. And we'll do the best to try and get the answers to your questions. But some of these are really complex topics that might really go into in-depth details. And so as we move through each of these kind of presentations and overviews from Germany and Italy and everything else, if we find that there's a subject that requires a further explanation or a second webinar or a sub-webinar, whatever we want to call it, we will actually try and schedule that and go deeper into those type of questions and those subjects. So right now it's going to really kind of be across a wide spectrum of information. Okay, let's see. Now, as I was mentioning, if you are coming from one of the authorities, or if you do have a great understanding of your national model, or if even you feel like you want to present, let's discuss it. And so here's the information for Harold and myself. You can reach out to us. You can send us an email. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And we'll talk about the future webinars and the schedule and to see where we can best, bring you on as a presenter to be able to do that. Okay. And with that, Harold, I will turn it over to you if you want to go ahead and start your presentation.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Maybe it's night for some of you. What I will do in this first introduction of these 12 webinars, I will talk about emergency management around the world. And this is what we like to focus on in these webinars, learn from each other, what is good some places, what can we learn, and how can we use this. So we look at models. There are challenges. We like also those to be exposed. And of course, lessons learned. And this year, last year and this year too, has been a challenge. All of us learned something about pandemic. It was a predicted disaster, but it seemed like very few thought it would really happen. But we have, and the pandemic has ruled us now soon for 1 year. But there are other disasters, as I have shown on this screen. And what we have seen, these risks are increasing in terms of frequency and consequences. I will take you to my horror show that this comes from all over the world. Here we have floods in Argentina. We have floods in Australia. Germany, here we have a tree blocking road. Here we are in Zimbabwe with landslide. Here we are in US also with floods. India and Bangladesh, China, Japan. And therefore I took, as you can see, this happens, and it happens all the time, with high frequency and also with larger consequences. So I went in today and looked at the EM.DAT, the database provided by the Belgium University, Catholic University. And here you see, I took then down climate change from the period 2010 to 2020. And as you can see, this is a coming thing, and maybe many of the organizations have already taken this risk into account in their plans and in their preparedness, but there might be a lot that hasn't done it. And you see by the color which countries are most affected by the climate change. And here I have some statistics. United States is topping this with 36 events, and then Australia and China. And we have the other countries. I also looked at the technical disasters, and as you can see, these are mostly more in Asia, South America, also some in Africa. And again, China is topping this with 166 events, and India 154, Russia's Federation, Republic of Congo, etc. Just wanted to show you this before we go into trying to structure how can we share lessons learned and learn from each other. We were invited in 2017 by the World Bank, a study on civil protection around the world. This looked at state of civil protection in the world, typologies, good practices, and economic returns. And in order to learn how this is done in different things, teams participated in this study, and we contributed with input from Australia, China, and Ukraine. Unfortunately, the World Bank decided that they would not publish the full study for different reasons, maybe political reasons. But I have taken out something which was published. We had a presentation from the World Bank at our conference in the Philippines in 2018, and also in Korea in 2019. So I will show you something which we can look at. And let's look at some definitions, because as Kyle said in the opening, we like you actually to tell about your systems, but we also like to try to direct you in a direction, so we have some ground rules. What do we want to present? And therefore, I go through this a few definitions. A civil protection system in a country is the coordinated framework of laws, plans, organizations, people, and resources working together to protect civilians, assets, and economic activities against the negative impact of natural or man-made disaster and accidents. So, civil protection is the total system. And a civil protection organization in any state, volunteer or non-governmental entity, assuming one or many responsibilities in the function of a civil protection system at national, regional, local, and international level, and man-made disaster accidents. And the last one, the disaster risk management. This is maybe a repetition of what you know, but still I think it's right to repeat it. It's the systematic process of using administrative directives, organization and operational skills and capacities to implement strategies, policies, and improved copying capacities in order to lessen the adverse impacts of hazard and the possibility of disasters. So these are what we try to come up with models from different countries around the world, and in order that we can see what is working well and which could be used other places. And it could be good that when we look into this, that we have a systematic view on looking on it. So I have here put up what we did in this World Bank study, disaster management and resilience, law enforcement, emergency response services, emergency medical services, community support services, and international emergency response activities. So when you put forward, for example, your model in your country, if you address these issues, it would be possible that we can see this from different angles. And that way we could build up a store of models which can be shared with all of you. What also they did in the World Bank study, which I felt was very good overview, and that they divided the civil protection systems around the world in 4 types of systems. It was the matured civil protection systems, which are blue on this, and which you see is mostly Europe, Russia, China, India, Australia, US, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina. And what is then the characteristics of what they call the matured civil protection system? It's a strong civil protection system in the world. There are countries that have established a high-level ability to provide emergency management services to their communities. These countries have in common 5 key strengths: a vision and goals for security and safety and readiness, grounded in a comprehensive legal and institutional framework, a culture of accountability in governance, the expertise in practicality, all the roles and functions of civil protection, the proximity of emergency management services in communities, reflected by dense coverage of fire, rescue, and emergency medical services at all geographical levels, and a scalable technical and financial capacity, which allows a preparedness and response adapted to the nature and magnitude of risks. Many long words, but this means they have been around with doing this for a long time and has developed their system to a level which works well. The next they divided it into was what they called developed civil protection systems, where you see part of Central America, South America, some African countries, Middle East, and some in the Asian countries. Then this is a developed civil security system, presents the characteristic of a mature system. However, it has a limited capacity and geographical coverage of all components of the civil protection system. Such systems are found in countries culturally oriented towards an elaborated protection of their citizens against disasters. Nevertheless, the expansion of their civil protection system is hampered by economic constraints and historical challenges. So this is also good to take into account, because there might be in certain countries, even if they would like to build out, that they have economic constraints to do that. The fourth civil protection was called developing civil protection systems. And this is established on a regulated framework, but it lacks the capacity to enforce it. Such systems present chronic gaps in terms of technical capacity and coverage. In such systems, the coverage for small incidents is low and relies on social safety nets, particularly in rural areas. The existing hard technical capacity is focused on urban areas, notably firefighting with search and rescue and EMS. It often shows a great involvement of non-governmental or foreign assistance entities and a great reliance on foreign funding. And still, we know from Tiems have a chapter also in Africa, and we know that in lack of other overarching systems, the community is well informed and are doing well in those countries. And there's a lot to learn from that as well. And the last one is called semi-structured civil protection system. And as you can see, Africa and part of this is Myanmar, I think. A semi-structured civil protection system has some institutional and technical components in place. However, the ability of actors to work together is low, capacity is low, there are many ad hoc and overlapping interventions. Roles and responsibilities are not understood by all actors the same way, and there can be a tendency to expect central decisions and resources. There is limited transparency and collaboration, resulting in duplication of efforts or ineffective prioritization. And the last one, unstructured civil protection systems. As you can see, mostly then in Africa and in Middle East. An unstructured civil protection system is dominated by independent actors with limited coordination. It is reactive and ad hoc based. It evolves out of necessity and good faith, usually on humanitarian basis. It is mostly found in fragile states. It is poorly equipped, a greater reliance on foreign assistance for all components. Most countries in this category are fragile states destabilized by civil conflicts and war. So this, I think this overview, I think is good. So you see, we should look at, and I hope there are participants in the webinar that can represent some of these types of civil protection systems. So we know, so we get to know how they operate and their challenges. And I would also like to see, if possible, that we could do a SWOT analysis for the different systems, where and this matrix you see here is done for the mature civil protection systems, looking at strengths in this situation for a mature system, maturity of laws, institutions, and stakeholders, opportunities, innovation, interoperability, weaknesses, low tolerance to risk, complex procedure requirements, and threats, new risk, terrorism, climate change, etc., and depletion of natural resources. So if we can have a description and then yourself look into this from the point of a SWOT analysis, I think we would have a lot of information to share. The last thing I like to tell you to a couple of slides of, is that in teams we work internationally, and we felt and have been working for actually since 2006, making up an international certification, which we actually launched this year after we have tested it for a year, and we have 7 candidates that has been certified. And the background for this is with an increasing number of disasters worldwide, resulting in more international collaboration and support to disaster-stricken areas, the need for more education and training in emergency and disaster management seems evident. Teams believes that it's important to raise the awareness of competencies needed in emergency and disaster management, and to support those participating in these activities and operation in acquiring those competences. And we have launched this certification, which we call TQC, Teams International Certification, or what we call Qualification Certification. Just a couple of slides on it. This is for whom. TQC is a certification for individual emergency managers with a nationally recognized professional certification, or other individuals with documented competence and experience, practical or academic, in international emergency and disaster management. TQC only certifies knowledge and competences about international standards, requirements and best practices necessary to create an international common understanding among those working with emergency and disaster management internationally. And the objective of this is, take the last point first, which I think is the most important, lead to an international common language, knowledge and understanding of emergency and disaster management. So we can talk to each other. We know that we have this, at least know same name on the things we are doing. Support international collaboration, share best practices, and promote global competence in emergency management. Just showing the process, you go through an application, you upload your data, and they have to look if it's compliance with our requirements, then an examination, and then certified. And we believe that this TQC can act as a facilitator element in the cooperation efforts between countries and organizations using a common language and a common knowledge and understanding of international emergency management and disaster response. During this seminar, I will come back to tell a little bit more about this, but first of all, we will focus on the different models. This is something putting all models together and have a knowledge which we can share with everybody. And we have a beautiful, to the right, we have a beautiful certificate diploma, which tells you are certified. That was what I wanted to share with you today. There might, I can't see any questions, but we are open for questions.
Thanks, Harold. That's really helpful. One of the really interesting things when you show those slides from the, the World Bank study is the fact that there's a correlation. I've often long said this, but it's sometimes very difficult to get people to understand that work internationally is, from my perspective, and maybe it's just anecdotal again, but there is a direct correlation between emergency management and domestic crisis management and stability. So I've worked in mostly post-conflict and operational environments, and having to rebuild emergency services, rebuild and create stability and functioning mechanisms in order to be able to have a functioning emergency management and response system. And I've often felt and have experienced the fact that the ability of a nation, especially in a post-conflict environment, to have what we're calling a civil protection system that is able to respond effectively and support the population is a direct indicator of stability. It's just that the unfortunate factor is that most of the funding mechanisms internationally are oriented towards these main pillars and structures in society for the security sector. So it is the rebuilding or building of security forces. It is the building of the police or the justice and rule of law and things like that. But very rarely do you find that international organizations build fire brigades. for example. And while there's some assistance coming from the World Health Organization, there's often not a lot of assistance that is going to developing pre-hospital care systems. And so that is where it is very interesting to see that the World Bank has kind of broken these down into these different types of developed systems and looking across the spectrum, because you could almost correlate directly between, stability of a nation and their civil protection system themselves. And the last comment I'd like to say on those slides as well is we've often in international work looked for references to be able to find out, okay, how do we rebuild the system? Just because, I've had come out of the US system doesn't mean that the US system is always the best answer in this situation. And it's really interesting to try and find different mechanisms to implement or to rebuild in a society when the frame of reference, there's often not a good frame of reference for different ways to do that. And so that's really interesting to see them break that down. And I think that we did discuss this before, that we should really kind of go a little bit deeper into that World Bank report and look at how they've categorized these different systems and how they rate them, because that's certainly very interesting information. But right now we've got a couple of questions, and I think the first one is for you, Harold, if you want to go ahead and take that one.
Yeah, I saw that. What is the difference between between TQC and SEM, the certification of IAM? And actually, I am in the process to release a report and launch this through a newsletter, but we have timed it maybe next week. It's in the last editing phase. But when we did looking through international certification, we came across two which we have described briefly in our description report, which will be available quite soon, and that is IAM, AEM, and CM certification. And what we say in the report is the International Association of Emergency Managers, IAM, created and administers the Associate Emergency Manager, AEM, and Certified Emergency Manager, SEM, certification programs. The AEM and SEM certification programs are internationally recognized and certify that the practicing AEM or SEM professionals has certified the education as applicable for the designation requirements, necessary training and experiential program requirements, and passed the examination administered by IAM as a condition of achieving the applicable certification. Team's impression is that IAM is not designed to create a common language and a common understanding among those working with emergency and disaster management internationally, which is the goal of TQCM. That's what we say in the report. We also have described the other one is Australian. I'm not going into that. I can distribute this report next week so you get a full understanding. But I can mention we have 7 from 6 countries: South Africa, Middle East, Jordan and Dubai, Australia, China, and what is the last? Okay, and 2 of these that we have certified, one from Australia, and Larry Porter, who is on today, I think, is SEM certified, and they have taken this as a layer going further. So that's what I can say, but I will distribute the report so you can judge for yourself. There was another question, not for me, or?
Yeah, great, Harold. Yeah, I think the next one is for you. I'll go ahead and read it out loud, which is, do you, I guess as teams, do you certify individuals only, or do you certify organizations as well, such as conduct an audit and accreditation to international standards?
Well, yeah, I can say something about that. We certify individuals in the start. There might be that we go further, but first of all, we concentrate on individuals. And what we do say, and the other, what was the last part of the question? I have to go back and see.
About certification of individuals only or also organizations,
Yeah, but
such
there
as
was
conducting audits or accreditation to international standards?
yeah, the goal that we have with this one is that we will, in the beginning, this is a short-term goal is to get this now working internationally, but we are looking for accreditation by a third party for our TQC certification. And neither SEM nor the Australian is an accredited certification. We think that's a strength we are looking for, so building up the systematic of it. It's also built such that we have a proctoring of the exam, such that you can take the exam wherever you are, and it's proctored, and we have a cooperation with a proctoring company called Proctor Free, which then supervise you during the examination and your screen. So everything is built up on an international basis. But I will do a smaller presentation later in this series when we have time for it.
Great, thanks, Harold. And just on a quick note, we do have, I counted just very quickly as best I could, we have about 23 nations represented just in this specific webinar for the kickoff. So I think that's a really good representation. And so that's great. And so, Harold, do you have any closing thoughts before we get, well, just one second. Seems like we got a couple more questions.
My hope is that we don't know, neither you or neither I know too much about every system. So we like the participants to actually make presentation of their system so we understand that. That is the wish I have on this one, because we would not be able to describe everything without your own help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And that's really the point here, is for us to all learn from each other and try and understand the different systems. I can tell you by working internationally and trying to do things like build fire brigades and others, it's quite difficult to find the best way ahead because everybody has a different model and a different opinion. And so finding that balance is often very difficult. So it's really great to kind of share this information and gain all these different perspectives. There's actually a couple more questions about the certification, Harold, but what I would say is, since we're going a little bit long.
To me. If they send a mail to me, I will distribute a description so you will find the answer to your questions.
Perfect. Yeah, so great. Yeah, thanks everybody. I just wanted to close this out because it's already about 45 minutes and we could talk for a long time, but we do want to appreciate everybody's time. And again, 23 nations, absolutely fantastic. Please look out for the email that's going to be coming out towards the middle of February or so, and we'll be announcing the next webinar in the series, where we'll start getting into more about the national models. If you do have questions about the certification, please email Harold. The email is right there. And if you do have any ideas about the webinar presentation itself, the nations, or you want to present your own national model, please send me an email and let me know. Also, if you have any questions that you want to have asked on your behalf. Again, this is meant to be interactive, and we're very much looking forward to this discussion over the course of 2021. And with that, I guess we will close this out. Harold, thank you very much for your time. And thanks to everybody for coming, and we will see you next time.
Yes, thank you all, and hope that you'll come aboard again, and also tell everybody in your network to join us. Thank you. Have a good evening, night, morning, wherever you are.
Thanks, everybody.